so important when we talk about chronic stress and people kind of being in a state of hyper-alertness or hyper-arousal is that when an individual experiences chronic stress, the brain starts to really view stress as kind of the baseline. It becomes the new norm. Now, we chatted about this in episode 5. All our brains, we're built for survival. So we all have that system in our brain that's our threat detection system. It's always scanning for threat or safety issues. And it's what kicks off our fight or flight response when we're in danger. However, when chronic stress happens, that system is really designed for short-term or acute threats. When people are under repeated stress, what happens is that system doesn't ever really get a clear signal that it's safe to really shut down or shut off. People end up in a state of kind of hyper-alertness or hyper-arousal. That fight or flight response is getting kicked off repeatedly, which increases a level of physiological arousal. And that's what really contributes to mental exhaustion and depletion. Where mindfulness comes into the picture is that mindfulness is exactly not about clearing our mind or forcing calm. It's about increasing awareness with what already exists. It's increasing awareness about what's already there, but not trying to immediately jump in and change it or reduce our stress in some way or reduce our anger. And the reason that that's important is because when we become aware of our internal experience and what's happening to us, and we acknowledge and recognize that we're stressed, if we immediately start that inner dialogue of, I have to calm down, I need to stop this. This needs to quit. Our brain experiences that inner dialogue as yet another threat. It's almost like we're arguing with that emotion and trying to force it to change. That usually just increases our fight or flight response, and it increases the intensity of that emotion. With mindfulness, when we can be aware of what's happening inside of us and acknowledge it, but we don't immediately try to change it, it's teaching our brain that we can have these thoughts, we can have these feelings, we can have these physical sensations, and we don't need that emergency response. We are not in acute danger right now. So essentially with mindfulness, the reason that it works is it helps people notice stress earlier before it starts to accumulate and build up into mental exhaustion. And it helps us notice it by increasing our awareness, but also reducing our reactivity so we aren't making those intense emotions even more intense and distressing.
Yeah, definitely. And are there any maybe suggestions that you have to, I guess, recognize that we need to be mindful earlier before we get into a state of this chronic stress, before our system has already raised a ton of red flags? Is there any suggestions you might have or things that you've experienced for us to kind of be even more proactive in that scenario?
So I think there's a few things. One is, in the moment that we're feeling stressed, we can't, especially if we catch ourselves trying to be like I've got to calm down, this has got to stop. That can be a good moment to practice mindfulness in just pausing, really tuning into what's going on inside your body, the thoughts going through your head, physical sensations, if you notice muscle tension, if you notice your breathing is a little more shallow. Acknowledge it without judging it and just kind of give it a moment, because a lot of times what we find is when we kind of acknowledge what the experience is, but again, we're not forcing ourselves to try to change that experience, that starts to settle that stress response.